Welcome to the Nonprofit Exchange Podcast. Stories by leaders for leaders to help you raise the bar on your own excellence, to release the potential inside of you. Now, here's today's podcast. Welcome to this edition of the Nonprofit Exchange. It's Hugh Ballou and Russell Dennis. Russell, good day to you, sir.
Happy Tuesday, the last Tuesday of August, as I said earlier, and welcome to the Nonprofit Exchange. We've got a brilliant financial mind here with us in the form of young Jim Dygert, and he's going to talk to us about money, something that some of us get a little uncomfortable with, but we always have to keep it in mind.
Oh, Jim Dygert, tell us about yourself. Tell us about Jim Dygert, please.
Good day. Well, I began a journey after college with a little operation called the U.S. Treasury Department, and I scored very high in some adaptation skills that I had, which allowed me to move into what we call a systems analyst. And as a systems analyst, I'm looking for not only the repeated process steps inside of an organization or inside of an activity, but I'm looking for the aberrations that are caused when things don't work right. And so with that, I was advanced to be an examiner for the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, which is a division of the U.S. Treasury, and they're charged with establishing the solvency and liquidity of our entire national banking system. So when I was doing my work there, we were doing the things that ultimately are now considered stress tests. The ability for a financial institution or any organization to behave according to its mandate, its vision, its mission, and its purpose, such that it becomes sustainable. So I learned the term sustainability long before it was applied to the green world of sustainable businesses for beyond economics. And I learned it from the standpoint of what we call triple bottom line, and the ability for an operation to not only create cash flow in those organizations that do create cash flow, or to serve and steward the cash flow that might be provided to it in the world and in the efforts in the arena of, say, nonprofits, where there may be a grant or maybe sponsors or maybe contributors that are allowing those funds to be available to pursue a particular goal or vision and mission. So in that process of learning systems dynamics and systems analysis and procedural process steps and mapping of flow of workforce behaviors, ultimately in the last 15 or 20 years, the industry that's applied to, I want to say, consulting, but not really. The work I do is not really consulting. It does give counsel, and it does give a procedural step. We actually have built a non-technology based, non-IT based, not software based, procedural process steps for risk mitigation. In effect, the decision-making skills that any organization needs to go through, whomever's stewarding the direction of that organization, needs to have a tool set for discerning and determining what is the best decisions to make. Now, there's a lot of prior work. We all say that we stand on the shoulders of giants who came before us. There's a lot of prior work in this industry, but no one has taken the position that we have that we create what we call a mirror and complement to the chart of activities, or the chart of accounts that is associated with financial statements. I think you'll agree, and your audience probably is familiar with, financial statements, and whether it's a personal solopreneur that needs to have a financial statement and does have one, or a enterprise or an organization, and whether they are for-profit or whether they're non-for-profit. Those financial statements are often the story that is told of the history of that organization's activities. And to be able to read that story is much like reading a language. So understanding the nuances of how those outcomes became to exist is the story which we dive into. And we give the real practical, actionable, practitionable events that allows the decision maker, again, whether it's a solopreneur or all the way through to a larger organization. We've worked with very large organizations up to 2,000 employees, actually more. And so the process works because it does what we would call, it actually goes beyond business process management. Some people may have heard of things like Agile or balanced scorecard or Six Sigma, or there's a whole arena of disciplines that approach and help to describe the interworking relationships that go on inside of an organization, because an organization is a living, breathing entity. It goes and lives, in essence, beyond the workforce that creates it. Well, hopefully it does. Mm-hmm. And so whether it's a proprietor who built something and then at some day steps away, either because they've sold it or it grew up. We've worked with employee stock option programs where employees have actually purchased the operations that were created by an original founder. We've worked on mergers and acquisitions where a company is going to be absorbed by someone else or merges, and there's a cultural clash that goes on between them. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes, cultural clashes are merely an outcome of not sufficient information and not sufficient communications. And there's a whole arena of work in that environment. We encapsulate that. We encapsulate financial literacy and mastery of financial statements, and we encapsulate this entire process of organizational behavior, and created a mirror and complement to the chart of accounts that mirrors and complements what we call as a chart of activities. And when we do that, we get a true line of sight between the behavior inside the organization and the financial outcomes that it produces. From there, we can begin to create pro formas and projections forward.
So, Russell, hang on a second. Russell, what is that spark in your interest? You work in the financial area. What kind of interest does that spark by you?
Well, one of the keys to being able to raise more money for nonprofits is really to kind of tie a story to it, because money tells a story. It has as you said, it has a language of its own, and people can tie. I like that statement, chart of activities. It's still COA, which I call the chart of accounts, chart of activities. So in painting a picture for people that support you, it's important to be able to talk about how what they're contributing is making a difference or making an impact in the lives of other people. So being able to follow that activity is important. And then as we teach here at Cinevision, the money should be tied to the plans.
Right.
So all of those numbers mean something. All of it has a place, as all of your activities have a place and should have a place. So unpack that a little bit for us, because people will sit there and they'll look at a chart of accounts and they'll think of a budget, but what's a good example of an account that becomes activity? If you were to take a certain set of items off of that chart of activities and kind of relate it to a chart of accounts, what would those things be and what kind of story would they tell?
Sure, that's exactly what the process begins to do. We actually map those and we end up with a value creation map. And the value creation map is indicative of the collection of activities. It's not just usually a single person or a single node that ends up impacting the financial direction of the organization, either the past or if we intend to change its future. So we're actually looking at that collection of things that may drive the results we're looking for. For instance, we may have, in a nonprofit, we may have, as you say, the source of funds coming from an outside environment. We don't have to have operational activities to drive source of funds the way a product or service company does, but we still have an activity that might be needed to raise funds and or to maintain funds or to continuously create an additional flow of funds. So that behavior activity as a group of things that are done end up being the driving factors that will of course show up in, instead of income like a for-profit company, it'll show up in the derived revenue sourcing.
Okay.
So
this sounds like an interesting hybrid between a spreadsheet and a value proposition map, for example.
Exactly. You're capturing the concept of what this is. Now the process is rather definitive. We've defined the exact ways in which things are done in order to solicit and create the organizational alignment, because as we all know, whether it's a for-profit or nonprofit organization, if we don't have alignment of vision, purpose, and mission, we don't have the right contribution of human energy in order to get the things accomplished we need to, whether it's run a particular campaign or do a particular event or maintain the back office in some way, or however that's to be done. So we go through a process that first aligns people, and secondly, through that alignment process, there's a dissection or a depiction by the individual parties of what is the value creation activities inside this organization that create a thrilled and delighted customer. Well, we can use the terminology customer in any vernacular we like, right? Who is our customer in this? Who is our customer in that? So when we go through that process, we're looking for the handoffs, the hand-ups, and the handoffs of the things that are going on, the action steps, the behaviors, and the activities that then can be mapped and charted. And now because of that grouping and that analysis work, we can find out what impact it has if it's on traditional financial statements or whether it's on a nonprofit's financial statements. Now we can begin to tie that together. And we've actually redefined what is called a KPI. People have heard of that. Key performance indicator. And when first created, and the KPIs were first identified and created, they had a very significant and purposeful meaning. Over the years, KPIs have slipped a little bit. The integrity of what a KPI is has been lost as a minutia almost inside of so many other disciplines. Sometimes today in a manufacturing world, a KPI might be, well, how many widgets did we produce today, or this week, or this month, or this quarter, or how many cartons did we ship off the loading dock, or those are certainly performance indicators. But they aren't what we call key performance indicators, and they aren't master measures of how things are being done inside the organization. When I say the how things are being done, not just the what is being done. So when we apply the process steps to which we derive key performance indicators, first of all, we're looking for an operational data point, something that we can demonstrably describe in an operational statement. And how is that measured against a financial data point? And that data point may show up in the financial statements. Once we have those two, now we're looking for discernment as to whether it's historic activities are in line with where we want to take the direction of the organization, or they may not be. And what changes do we need to make in order to impact the future growth of the organization? There are some similarities in for-profits and nonprofits. Not always, but in some for-profit businesses, they have a board of directors. And the board of directors may be implementing operational directives that the chief executive officer or hired president may need to have as a mandate to move forward to directionalize the growth of that organization. And it's coming from the board. Similarly, nonprofits may have an operating manager or an ED or managing director that is stewarding the direction of the organization, but they may also have a board that has some mandates to what is the outcomes that we're looking for. As the decision maker and the go-to process person, the president or the managing director, they have to make decisions regularly on what is the direction that this organization is going in, and is it consistent with the mandate?
I like
and
where we're
what
going.
changes?
Russell opened up a good topic. I'm sorry, I thought that was a period. It was a comma. Russell opened up this really fascinating topic, this channel. I'm really seeing, as he opened it up and as you have delved into the data, it's almost like a three-dimensional way of looking at a static document, a one-dimensional document. Because I find that there's remarkable similarities in entrepreneurs, whether they're working in a for-profit or a for-purpose, we're calling this enterprise. And virtually the board of directors has financial oversight responsibility. The financial oversight and governance, so the two big ones. And Russell's area of work is high-performance nonprofits that generate money. And my work is overlapping with that, and actually our work overlaps each other, but it's how do we generate the culture of high performance. And Jim, what occurs to me as you're explaining this is the similarity is people running the organization don't really understand the numbers and what they mean. So there's a fundamental lack of understanding of the balance sheet and the P&L and the budget, and they don't really know what a cash flow projection can be used for. But they also don't realize the metrics that you're putting on the plate. You know, how you're measuring what we do, you're measuring how we do it, but we also need to measure the results of what we're doing.
Correct.
That's the real meat of
Correct.
the thing. So speak in that direction a little bit. You're creating a whole new picture, and we named this interview. I took the liberties in saying it's a new systems approach to financial decision making for nonprofits, and so what you're opening up is a whole new paradigm of how do we, as the governance of this organization make effective financial decisions.
Correct. Correct. Because it's not just financial decisions, because we have non-financial outcomes as well. And that may be job satisfaction, that may be enjoyment in what we do, that may be the contribution of time and talent besides the treasure that people may be giving to a nonprofit or for-purpose business activity. So we are looking at that holistic approach from a operations, and how does the grease move between the wheels? If we call the money the cash flow, the grease that moves between the wheels, how does it get there? Where does it go? How is it used? And what decisions processes do we have to go through in order to implement change and or growth and or strategies that we wouldn't otherwise be able to project forward without the understanding of how much grease there is, where it comes from, and where is it best used? Because this is a decision process tool to help discern the activities inside the organization that will drive the organization to where its intended destination is. We look for a lot of budget process steps are analysis work to discern, how much did we do last year and what's our deviation differences between the few years before and where do we want to go and we set goals and we set things as dreams, as visions, as desires, and we begin to move there and we don't have the tools to stay on track. We don't want that train to jump the track. Number one, we have to lay down the track in a way that is consistent with the activities of the past and consistent with our intended outcomes, and set the mileposts and the signs on the track ahead to ensure that it stays on the track. But if it starts to get off the track, happens, how do we know it's getting off the track before we've derailed it? Long before we've derailed it, long before so that we can make sure that we're staying on track and staying focused with our vision and purpose. You had it right, Hugh. This is like three-dimensional view of a single dimension financial statement. When a business operator looks at their financial statements, oftentimes the individual who's running the organization or that entity has a little bit of a depth into that, has a little bit of a second level view into it. But until that second level view can be catalyzed and articulated to the other members of the organization, such that the other members have full agreements, unanimity, and understanding of what's happening inside that organization, the value creation activities inside the organization that create thrilled and delighted customer, all those things that begin to manifest and create the organization as an entity. That's your second level of depth. Your third level of depth is once that takes place, we need a loop back system. We need a way in which those activities are not only understood, but they are inculcated into the system in a way in which those behavior traits begin to manifest by everyone inside the organization. The deeper we take it through a workforce environment, the more sustainable results that we can end up achieving. And believe me, the beauty of this is it's not particularly hard and it's not particularly difficult. As I said, it's not tech and it's not software. These are process state activities that can take a very limited amount of time when we implement them in the strategy that we've created.
Yeah, tag on that a minute. That's a direction I was hoping to go, because as you explained it, I'm melting down here. This looks like it's really hard. And for Russell, it's a piece of cake, but for me, it sounds really hard. So unpack, can you kind of give us for instance, this is one thing you could implement and without a whole breaking sweat, or maybe it's not that difficult.
Sure. I will use an example where a chief financial officer, president of a company, and again, this could be a nonprofit or for-purpose business, has a viewpoint of the operational activities of the business, of that endeavor. And we begin to do a process map and let them unpack that tacit knowledge, that information they have in their head. How do we do this? How do we operate? When that is done, we usually go to the next key performer inside the organization. And in a for-profit, sometimes that's a controller or a CPA or the CEO, CFO, excuse me. And we get their alignment. We get their vision of it. And once we get unanimity between those two, we can then begin to, from a holacracy, begin to move that out into the next realm of responsibilities. Senior teams, the core teams of a for-purpose organization. And as that begins to become a real map, a real value creation activity map, now we begin to tie those things into, in their case, their unique financial statement, whatever that statement is. So the system, we've used it for early stage startup organizations that are less than 3 years in operations. And it does have tremendous value, and we can get alignment. The best use of what we've accomplished is in larger organizations that have been established for a period of time and have a lot of working modules. There's a theory of domains that say in an ordered and unordered states. Ordered states are things like simple and complementary, and unordered are things like chaos and complex. We work in the world of simple and complexity, and because of that, every organization has intended activities. Therefore, we have a loop. Once we know that there's intended activities, we have a loop. When we have a loop, we can define the elements that support that loop. So if I could bring it back down to that working relationship for you to understand, Hugh, it's simply diagnosing the activities inside the organization. Again, looking for systems that are created, and some of the best activity that we've applied this to is there's a thing called the theory of constraints. If you constrain a volume of water and you constrict it, you're going to reduce the amount of flow that water has, correct? You may increase the speed, but you're going to potentially restricting that. When we apply this process using the theory of constraints, we're applying it to the aberrations in the system. Remember, I said something about my background, systems analyst, and aberrations in systems. That's what we look for. When we apply it to an organization, we're looking for those things that just don't connect well. The things that we call disconnects, constraints, or problematic areas, the things that keep people staying up late at night, those little worrisome areas that say, I wish I could fix this. This process begins to unpack and peel back the process, the activities that create the process, which are the intended outcomes. We define those unintended outcomes that are the consequences, and then we can reapply the same process to discern what is the intended outcomes we want, and giving us the gauge point, that behavior statement data point on top of a financial data point. And now we can begin to monitor and make sure that the activities are carried forward. We're a big believer in organizations should run under what we call non-directive leadership. We've gone through the development stage in organizations where directive leadership is command control, rank and file, orderly activities. I'm not saying that's being replaced. There is still a lot of need for the process steps that has been built on. But in today's environment, to become nimble and to be able to adapt itself as a living entity in an environment that's also changing, the better you can encapsulate your living environment and ensure that you're in command and control of that environment means you are better to be nimble. Command and control in that sense means that you have diversified some authority and moved that authority down through the rank and file so that decisions can be made by people who have the responsibilities and they then need the authority to make those decisions. So we look at non-directive leadership in that the hierarchy of workforce, be it all the way up through managers and divisions and presidents, all the vice presidents, all the way up through, is all about red light, green light, or yellow light projects, where the projects are being brought from the lower level and brought in is saying, we believe this is a better way to accomplish what we needed to and we intend to accomplish. Here's how we propose that we're going to change what we have happening to improve that process. And senior personnel will then either red light the process because it's not acceptable for whatever the reasons are, and yellow light it, with exceptions being, I'll green light it once you have these answers, but we have to look at the system elsewhere and see where we have some aberrations that may take place. Or green light it, you did a great job, we don't see anything wrong with this, we've checked, and we believe that you have a solution to a problem, and this is the way to mitigate it. Our blessings, go ahead and implement this process.
Russell, you're contemplating some of these themes. What's brewing in that shiny head of yours? A good-looking shiny head.
Oh, well, yeah. A lot of people are jealous of my naturally curly hair, but we'll save that for another episode. But what I'm thinking, because that's the third piece of what I call building a high-performance nonprofit, is staying on track. And so having good tools to measure is critical. And I'm going to ask you in a minute how you get around some of this overwhelm, because one of the, as Hugh talked about, these things can look overwhelming, especially to somebody that's in a small nonprofit. So what I look to do, I remember meeting a young man by the name of Brendan Brouchard, who talked about creating tools. And his theory was that they should be easy to access, understand, and use. And so those are the kind of things. I've got some things that aren't necessarily scientific, but it gives nonprofit leaders ways to measure things like just like a profile of a donor or a customer, really very basic things. And I find that with tools, if the tools kind of flow into the work that people are already doing, it becomes easier for them to actually access them and use them. And so I think there's a bit of resistance. I know you're working with larger systems. I can't imagine how much you see, but what I was going to ask you was, because a lot of people, their eyes will glaze over. So how do you break down this need in a way that people sort of get it and convince them that it's really in their best interest to use it? Because there's that human resistance to things that look like it's going to take a lot more effort than the benefits will produce. How do you work around that, and what are some good ways to talk to people, especially nonprofit leaders, about the importance of this and some things they can do that don't look so large and overwhelming?
Good Good point. And here's how simple as it can be. When we look at an organization, any kind, no matter its size or purpose, there are 4 major activities. We get all caught up in all kinds of strategy sessions and all kinds of things elsewise, but they're really just 4 activities. There's sourcing and discerning who our client is. Whatever that client is, again, for purpose or for profit. There is servicing and ensuring that that client, prospect, customer is cared for. There's research and development, and then there's back office. Our proposition in the way we have designed and created this simply follows those 4 arenas. And when you look at your whole existence and you discern yourself in those environments, now, yes, we can get into all kinds of permutations and chart of accounts that can get to 300 line items and all kinds of things, and you know, financial statements that come off as reams of data because it's a big organization. But if we really step back and look at the organization and say, what are we doing here? Why are we doing this? And what are those elements or arenas, if you will, that say, if we could encapsulate and roll up all those chart of accounts into categorical arenas, those are the 4 arenas that we would find. Now, it is possible to have just a couple of other minor arenas, but our contention is that's not the focus and the motivation of what the organization was intended to accomplish. It may have grown into some of those other arenas along the way. And they could be carved out and pushed away or sold, or maybe they developed so deeply that it was a great idea and it's time for it to carve out, and it's time for it to break away and become its own existence. And we'd have to nurture it and support it along the way. But when we look at those as the aberrations and not the real content, we now are putting them in the right perspective, and we can stay focused on the right content in the right context so that we can actually create operational behavior. Intended organizational operational behavior for intended outcomes.
So this is all very exciting stuff. And I noticed, because you can really get lost in the weeds with all of the different software and tools and stuff that are out there. So when you're working with people, what would you say is the primary deliverable they get that they can take and use to, once this system is built, keep themselves on track?
Perfect. Well asked. If we hold on to those 4 arenas and you simply look at each of those arenas and give yourself 4 or 5 activities in each of those arenas that constitutes the major activities of that arena. Right? What is the most dominant things that go on in that arena, whether it's sourcing or profiling and understanding who our client perspective is, or whether it's the supporting and product or service delivery, or whether it's R&D, researching, or whether it's back office. If we looked at 5 or 6 major activities inside that organization, we'll be able to map out, they'll be able to map out for themselves. And this could be a 6-person organization. This doesn't have to be 6,000. This can be, a very small or ongoing activity. Once they begin to find that, now you're really fine tuning from there is who's doing those things. How many hats does somebody have to wear in order to get these done in a small organization? But when we get into bigger ones, we're just carving them out and breaking them down deeper. So we look at the chunk it up to the top. Look at it from that 10,000-foot view and just simply understand the mechanics of what's going on. And when you begin to get those mechanics now you can actually create a map. We call that a value creation map. Those are the things, those 4 or 5 or 6 things in each one of those arenas that are done in order to make a thrilled and delighted customer.
Yeah,
Right?
that's brilliant. At what point, with the number of items that they have under these 4 arenas, at what point is an organization in danger of losing its effectiveness? Is there an optimum number of activities under each area, and which I'm certain probably that there are certain things that are most important to each one, but what would you say an optimal number is for in terms of the effective span of control and efficiency?
I don't know that there's an absolute way to discern that, because some different industries do different things, and so there'll be depth in one area versus another. But for us to look at things, whether it's a 6,000 employee person organization, or whether it's 60, we still maintain that there's a probably optimum number to define for yourself, because a master measure of defining, this is what we call the master measure that leads to the KPI, or the key performance indicator. That master measure is the pinnacle of activities, whether it encompasses several thousand people underneath it or just a few people underneath it. And we do look for an optimum. When we build a chart of activities, we're looking for just 20 to 22 activities. That's it. We're looking for 20 to 22 activities that constitute probably well over 98% of the activities inside the organization.
Yeah. And I was just thinking about those KPIs. They're different for everybody, for every industry. So those KPIs with a nonprofit, your donor, your funding sources, there are a lot of other people that kind of help define what those are, the people that get your services. So
right.
A lot of definition and customization.
And we also believe a key performance indicator is something that expires over time. When we build a KPI, we're building the data point for the problem, what I was talking about earlier, theory of constraints, the difficulties, the problems, the issues. And we're building a data point over a financial outcome point. And we're looking to improve that KPI to the point of where now the problem has been negated. It's not a problem anymore. It's superseded. It's gone away. Or another problem becomes more prevalent and more important. So we rotate KPIs over time, and having a history base of what those KPI measures are and maintaining an index of those. Now we have an assessment tools over time of what we've done and what the process steps of the organization has been. It literally builds the generic environment that allows that organization to thrive and survive over time and be nimble moving into its future.
For some people who aren't familiar with KPIs, give us an example of what some typical KPIs might be. And then
Sure.
as a group, we're looking at a staff and a board, committees, volunteers, and a for-purpose company, enterprise. So as we look at the KPIs and we look at the measurability of our process and our outcomes, it would seem that would be a way to engage the culture in a performance standard they have not otherwise envisioned.
Sure. Let's use something that's been typically done, and I'm sure it's still being done pretty regularly in a for-purpose organization. Let's say they do something that's called a fundraiser. They are doing an activity. I don't care if it's a 5K, 10K run or a pie eating contest or whatever it might be, right? And they've done this before, and they know what they are likely to redo again this next season, and they're planning for it. And in their planning steps, they begin to find out, how many people do we have to do this, and how many people do we have to do that, and how many things do we have to do. The KPI in that arena, or that, in that activity, would be something more along the line of, do we have the punch list created for what we need to accomplish? Surprisingly enough, that simple activity is usually where most of our counsel ends up being, or our mentoring ends up being, when someone is failing at an activity. It's, are you doing the basic block and tackling? So if we can now say, we need to have an overall planning strategy that it constitutes the punch list necessary, that defines all the activities. Before we go in and assign activities, we need to make sure we have a reconcilable document, effectively, a reconcilable plan that says, now we know how many we're going to assign for this. Now we know how many people we're going to have this. And now we have a better, higher predictability of the results happening the way we had intended. Now we can define that against the outcome, which is how much did we accrue that day, or that weekend, or that 2-day event, or 5-day event, or whatever that is. Now that seems rudimentary, but it does give you an idea that we're looking at the facts of activities, not the who, and not necessarily the what, but a little bit more about the how. And are we defining the how clearly enough that we can answer it, so that we can provide the who that ends up coming out to be the what? In a for-profit business, it could be as simple as, and this can happen in an intentional purpose business. Let's say we're not having good success in driving traffic to our website, and we don't have a very good conversion rate, and people aren't hitting our landing page, and they're not doing well. Well, how about, do we have an overall master plan that includes the process steps associated with all the right things that are necessary to make that work? Or did we just venture into it with a hope and a wish and a dream and a desire to say that we want to have this outcome? So it might sound like tediousness, but we're not talking about the actual things that need to be done. We're talking about defining what needs to be done. Once you define what needs to be done, now you can have the measurement tool to say, are we doing it?
So
are we doing it?
Let's connect the dots. What Russ and I are good at is creating a strategy. And strategic plan in the center vision world is called a solution map. And it's fundamentally the same. Where do you want to be and how are you going to get there? So there's all of these things we think we're going to do. And subsets of that, we've got milestones that have price tags on them. So we have to be able to generate funding for those. We have a marketing channel. We have to be able to let people know about what we're doing so they will fund us. And then so the people who attend our events, the people we want to show up for our board, our committees, actually know what we're doing. So how do, and we're coming to the last 10 minutes here, so keep just a short answer here, and then we're going to have a wrap with a sponsor message, and you get the final tip before we cut loose this interview today. But so how do we connect all those different parts?
So how do we connect them? That was the question.
Well, is what your tool providing, is it a way to take what we think we want to do on paper, what we actually want to do, and integrating it? Is your process help us connect those dots?
Yeah, in that we're looking at the actual activities that are being performed to date. Now, a little bit of what you were describing was a proactive going to do thing. Did I garner that a little bit when you said if you looked at a strategy, you're looking at, we want this to happen, so we have a budget for that, right? We are applying it in the realm of, is that activity working now? Because if it is, that's how we're applying our systematic approach. If it's not working now, then that becomes very hypothetical, and it only allows us to set the framework, but we don't have the loop back being the financial outcomes yet. We have to have, in our environment for what we're doing, we have to have the loop back. It's a quad loop actual activity instead of a dual loop or a triple loop. It's a quad loop. By the time we get done, we have to have that connectability between operations and the outcomes.
And that's missing often, isn't it?
If it's an ongoing organization, it's there. If it is a early stage startup or brand new, or it hasn't got enough history to it, it's extremely difficult to tie this together. We can do theory, and we can get people to understand, and they can adopt the process steps that allows for the alignment to take place. That vision forward, that alignment that goes on, that's good. But in order to create the line of sight reconcilement to the financial statements, if there's
somewhere, you have to begin where you are. And by having some tools that you can take and start tracking certain things, you can build that history. And so it's really important to build that history. If you're talking about a startup, and you probably come across some that are looking at raising large amounts of money, it's critical to have that system in place, I would think.
Yeah, it's about the source and use of funds. So if we go back to that value map, and we go back to 20 to 22 activities and the chart of activities, and within those four arenas, anybody can do that. Startups can do it, early stage development, ongoing activities that haven't had quite a history quite yet. Anybody can do that. And when you step back and look at and get real about, well, this is what we're doing here. Now that you can begin to do that, you'll channel the activities, that precious time and that very precious talent that's wanting to support that idea, concept, or project that's being launched, can now devote their attention to the right things and minimize those things that might be important, but they're not critical, right? And now we can spend energy and time on the right things.
Russell, I bet you're thinking what I'm thinking, that some of these are highlighting the important things that donors want to know about.
Oh, yeah.
Where, when somebody comes to you and they say, somebody may be listening here, and we hope that people listening here get value out of it. That's why we do this work. It's very important. So when somebody approaches you and they say, okay, well, I think I understand in theory why I might need this. Where do I start? Where is it that you tell them to start, or you begin the process with them to actually move in the direction so that they can implement this and start to use this system?
Again, working from the inside out, we start with the chief steward of the organization. Is that 2 minutes? Okay. We start with the chief steward of the organization, whoever's the responsible party for making the focused decisions of what to do here. And we simply interview them and have them unpack that story that is that chart of activities, that 20 to 22 activities inside of those four arenas. Once we unpack that, then we begin to just hone it a little bit. But more importantly, since we're not really ever talking to people who are solopreneurs, we're talking to somebody who's got at least a few people around them. Now we go ahead and begin to go with the next responsible party. And without the answers provided by the first, we allow them to do the process maps themselves. Then we begin to get the alignment. And when we get the alignment from there, now we begin to say, okay, where's our energy and time? And as that system begins to manifest and move out into larger circles, From that alignment process, again, once we have alignment, we can begin to make measure. And depending upon how we're measuring against, whether it's a history of a story in the financials or whether it's simply what our intended outcomes are, now we can at least begin to apply it.
A lot of good intentions. This backs it up with some tracking and some. I see this as an energy field where people understand what's going on, so it builds the collaborative energy in the organization. So, Jim, we're going to talk about one of our sponsors today, and then give you a chance to give a parting thought or a tip. What's a tip you want people to think about? Your website is Management Operating Systems, MOSupgrade.com, MOSupgrade.com. You spell out the word upgrade. And people, I guess, can find out more there and know how to contact you when they go to that website. Speaking of websites, CenterVision has launched and is growing its online community for community builders. And you combine synergy and vision, you get CenterVision, and it's about leadership. So centervisionleadership.org is the website. And our web provider is our branding, marketing web company, rockpapersimple.com in Melbourne, Florida. Joshua Adams and his team have done a stunning job, and we're still activating functions. So come and join the community, centervisionleadership.org, and find out what it's about. And if you want to know about how you can engage your stakeholders, engage your tribe, engage your donors, then it might be a problem with your website. rockpapersimple.com/Hugh, H-U-G-H. There's a page for you there, and you can free episodes and help sponsor the magazine and the website. So, Jim, what do you want to leave people with today?
Well, I know because of the nature of your questions, you wanted me to get it down simplified. And I believe we have. I may not have explained it quite that well from the standpoint of it's very, a professional can do things that look so simple. And when we take a look at your organizational activities, we really do look at the complexity of every organization, but we simplify it. If I could leave one message behind, it is, this ain't so hard. This ain't so hard. But as I said, we built it on the shoulders of giants. There's a lot of research and a lot of data behind this that proves out the process, proves out the theory, and we've got some very practical demonstrations of outcomes that have worked for some very goodly sized organizations. Yes, MOSU, and the U stands for upgrade, so MOS Upgrade, which is Management Operating System, upgrade.com. You can find me there listed as one of the team members. We do have an organization to implement this with some very specialized talents as well. And then directly people can contact me easily. My name, Jim Dygert, at Zoho, ZOHO.com. And it's just 4 letters, Zebra Oscar Henry Oscar.com. And love to be able to walk some people through this. Our real challenge is to find the people that have a real desired impact and are having some difficulty making that happen.
Russell, let's say goodbye.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Jim. Thank you very much. And it's always important to measure what you're doing. And it's not rocket science. So contact Jim, go to centervisionleadership.org or russelldennis.com, and there's tools for you to do all of these things. Many thanks again.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.